Welcome to UnityNow, the podcast where we discuss unity stemming from the Unity 2020 plan with one goal in mind: bring unity to America and end the Republican-Democrat duopoly. This podcast is created, produced, hosted, recorded, edited, and publicized by a wonderful team of Unity volunteers that came together from all over the country to collaborate in a completely remote environment. To provide a brief introduction to Unity, we offer this. Unity 2020 was an idea that started when Brett Weinstein announced the plan on the Joe Rogan Experience in mid-June 2020. From there, the movement was born, and since then, tens of thousands of volunteers have signed up, organized, and begun to create a groundswell of support. The plan always introduced a fail-safe so we would not be an election spoiler. This was to end the plans for the 2020 election if it was determined there was no viable path to the White House. Sadly, this became the case. In keeping our promise, this fail-safe was executed and announced by Brett Weinstein. However, we believe Unity continues to be the number one antidote for what ails the country right now, and so we are pressing on with a renewed spirit. To learn more and become a volunteer, visit articlesofunity.org and check out Brett Weinstein's YouTube page and the Articles of Unity YouTube page for the weekly campfires.
Welcome to the UnityNow podcast, the podcast all about the Unity movement. I'm your host today, Eric White, and we're very grateful today to have Anthony Magnabosco. Welcome, Anthony.
Hey, thank you very much for having me on your show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'll just give a quick background on who you are, and then maybe you can put it into your own words, and we'll get into street epistemology.
Sure.
So Anthony is a skeptic and atheist from San Antonio, Texas, who has been practicing and promoting street epistemology since 2013. Anthony has had several hundred chats, many of which can be found on his YouTube channel, which we'll link to in the notes. And they're on a variety of claims, including gods, ghosts, karma, law of attraction, and a variety of social and political topics. He's also a founder and the current executive director of the new nonprofit organization called Street Epistemology International. So, Anthony, do you want to just maybe start us off with what is street epistemology?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird term, isn't it? Well, a lot of people hear that term and they think it's like street preaching or something along those lines, or it's very academic, and it's kind of the complete opposite. It's where you're engaging in conversation, where you're largely listening and asking a lot of questions, and definitely not arguing or ridiculing. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, I suppose, because oftentimes when you run into somebody who makes a claim about reality that you're sure is factually untrue, we typically want to give people facts to show that they're mistaken, and with the expectation that they will receive your facts and find it compelling enough to lower their confidence in their claim and change their mind. Mm-hmm. And your listeners may realize or understand that that doesn't usually work that way. Usually the complete opposite happens. So street epistemology, I think, is sort of the recognition that we need to have a different way of talking with people about topics that are core to who they are when they're very tied to a person's identity, so that the defenses aren't going up. So the person that you're speaking with is staying open and honest when you're exploring how they arrived at their certainty that something is really true. So it's a kind of a counterintuitive process, and it's a little bit difficult. It's kind of difficult to take your own ego and goals and objectives and maybe even wanting to change the person's mind or set them on the right path. You kind of have to set all that aside and try to hear the other person out, because number one, they could be correct. But number two, if they're not correct, approaching the dialogue in a way that we try to do when we're using street epistemology, by asking lots of questions and giving people plenty of time to think about the best answer that they can give, it can be a little bit challenging for people who have never really engaged with folks in that way. So it takes a little bit of practice, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But if you watch examples of people using it, that's what sells this. It's hard for me. It might be a little bit difficult for me to sell it to people. It's almost better to watch a couple of examples where you see somebody make a claim and you see somebody using this approach of engagement where it's cordial, it's deep, it's effective, it could be even productive in helping a person take another look at their views. So that's what street epistemology is. And to be clear, I didn't invent it. I merely read a book that talked about it. I was intrigued by it. I ran out with my video camera. Well, I didn't really run out, but the thought kind of percolated. Like I might give this a try and let's see if it really works. And what we started finding is that it does seem to be quite effective in helping a person take another look at their views, bring clarity to their own perspective, and sometimes even change their mind or lower their confidence in their initial claim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And before we started recording, we were talking briefly about how I came to learn about street epistemology this year, actually. And the timing could not have been better, honestly, because this summer in particular, I found myself, for maybe like one of the first times in my life, just on the complete opposite side of my closest friend groups. And I was having a really hard time having conversations about what I thought about things. And, the police brutality and police racism was a topic that we just couldn't find common ground on. And I, like you said, I found myself trying to present all these facts and overwhelming them with information that I had found to try to sway their view or to try to get them to change their beliefs. And, luckily it didn't cost me any friends. I still have those friends, but it very well could have. And I'm sure there's people listening who have had an experience this year where a conversation about something that's a hot button issue, ruins a relationship or makes it hard to even communicate with that person at all. So yeah, I just want to thank you for making this tool so available. I know you didn't invent it, but you provide a lot of resources that have been extremely helpful. So
well, thank you. I've been trying to popularize it and develop it and promote it, I suppose. And even sort of legitimize it and make it sort of normal. I want to make it normal to use polite questions to respectfully explore claims that people make in an effective way. Mm-hmm. Because like you said, I experienced the same thing with my interactions, damaging relationships, damaging friendships, because I approached things in a very aggressive way, or I gave people facts or ridiculed them, embarrassed them. And that could just blow up in your face, make somebody more entrenched in their view. And that's kind of problematic. Now, you mentioned common ground. Like this approach isn't agreeing to disagree. There is a factual truth of the matter with regards to the claims that people are making. So this isn't like, let's just all agree to get along and that type of thing. No, we really want to figure out what the truth of the matter is. And if you think that you have it, we want to ask you questions to understand how you got there so that we can believe it too. Mm-hmm. But if you, to your own standard, recognize that maybe I don't have really good reasons, or the manner with which I'm going about confirming my reasons to be good reasons isn't so reliable. When a person discovers that on their own, that's where they end up reflecting on their own views and changing their own mind. So a lot of this is just a big part of street epistemology is holding up a giant mirror to the person so that they can think about how they arrived at their conclusion. Mm. So you kind of take yourself out of it. It takes a lot of the pressure off of it too. I don't have to be well versed in immigration policy, or whether the election was rigged or not, or whether someone thinks that there's a higher power or that karma is real. I can just reflect back what I'm hearing. If I understand you correctly, I think you're saying this. Now, if I understand what you're saying here, this is your biggest reason. Is this the biggest reason that drives your current level of confidence? So you're engaging in a dialogue that's kind of one way, I have to say, but it's kind of them back to themselves. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and that's so true because, in my experiences that I mentioned before, talking about things like police racism or police brutality, it was very much, there was no concern on my part about how they got to their truth. I just saw it as they're making this claim. I disagree with it. Here's why. But the thing that I love about street epistemology is, like you said, I think this is in the Street Epistemology Handbook that it can be found on the website, but it's like something like, it's not a debate, it's a collaboration, right? You're working together to get somewhere.
That's typically how we try to frame it. Yes, we want to try to frame it as, how can we both work together to verify the steps that you use to arrive at your current level of confidence that something is true? So you might get lucky and present somebody with facts that just happens to be the exact thing that they were looking for to change their mind. So facts still have their place, but you need to have a small engagement, a brief engagement, to figure out where they're at so that you can meet them there. It doesn't make any sense to give people facts to show that masks are effective in reducing COVID transmission, for example, if that fact wouldn't affect their current level of confidence. So you have to have an engagement with them to figure out, well, why do they think that masks are useless or something along those lines? So you have to, it's really crucial to engage with the person to figure out where they're at. It really is.
And in your experience, there's certain topics right now that are almost impossible to talk about. Like you can't, there's certain things you could say about hot button issues, and I'm going to just keep going with the police brutality thing because that's been brought up. But, the one thing that I would point out was that, there's also white people who die at the hands of police. So is this just a race issue if there's also people of other races who are suffering from this? And so saying that, I'm a progressive, I'm a liberal, I have only voted Democrat, I've never voted for a Republican candidate pretty much at any election. But saying that can get me labeled as alt-right, or it can get me labeled as a racist myself. So how does street epistemology help us navigate these conversations that are just riddled with landmines?
There's a lot of landmines out there, and some people don't even want to navigate them. They would just rather close their browser down and not even have the engagement or not talk to their family member. So that's an option for people, but it's an unfortunate one. And I think a lot of people are burned by previous interactions. And yes, you're right. Sometimes revealing your position on a sensitive topic can alienate you from your own tribe, which is really quite unfortunate, because the only way that we're going to figure out what the truth of the matter is if we have dialogue with each other. That's crucial. And it's kind of disconcerting when members of your own tribe will almost be just as effective at interfering with your progress as the person who you might disagree with. So sometimes just explaining it's a little tough when you're having a dialogue on a sensitive topic where there's other people around, particularly if it's like in the text messages of a Facebook post or something like that. What we're finding, at least what I'm finding, is that those are great places to find people to talk to. But if you can bring them into a video chat or ideally face-to-face, you're going to probably have a better, meaning more honest and open and productive conversation than if you are very gingerly putting your words out so that you're walking this really fine balancing line between alienating yourself from your own tribe and upsetting the person that you're speaking with. So I guess the solution to that probably is just the recognition that, hey, listen, I'm attempting something different here. I want to engage with this person and ask them questions, and I might even reveal things about my own position that you may disagree with. But go with it here with me, and maybe by the end of it, you'll be enamored with the method that I'm using when I'm engaging with our opponent, that you might want to look into it further so that you can engage with me on the things that we disagree with. So like I said earlier, I want to get to the point where most people in the population are familiar with this tool so that we can not only use it with the people that we disagree with, but people within our own tribes where we have these subtle differences. That could be, today, if you disagree with one person on one thing, even though you align with all this other stuff, they might unfriend you just because of that. And it's really kind of sad and problematic. But I'm optimistic about this approach. I think there's something to it. I think it's potentially the solution to the problem that we're facing today.
Yeah. The problem being the lack of communication between opposing viewpoints.
Not only the lack of communication, but the just the blatant disregard for the other side, the dehumanization of the other side, just a quick dismissal of a person's position just because we disagree with them. It's really problematic. But I don't want anything more to that.
Okay. Do you in your practice of practicing SE with strangers, is there, I think one of the guidelines in the book is to leave out your opinion unless it's asked for. Do you find that is there room to have your opinion in these types of conversations, or is it, in your view, best to just focus on their perspective and try to fully grasp it without interjecting your own thoughts?
I've tried both. And when I first started going out for a couple of years, I would be very cagey in my own position. I didn't want to reveal where I stood on their claim, mainly because I didn't want to sway them. But when you record conversations of you demurring when you're asked where you stand on their claim, people who watch that think, well, why didn't he reveal their position? What's he hiding? So I actually started revealing my position. And it was interesting. Yes, sometimes people would become defensive if let's say they think a God is real, and I say that I don't think one is real. You can see them physically recoil in some instances. They cross their arms, they shut down. But it doesn't always happen. Sometimes people appreciate that you've revealed your position, and they may even know people that hold your view, or they were actually they're considering your view. They didn't let on it first. So there's value in sharing your position, but you do run the risk, I think, of making a person more defensive in revealing their own. But it really should be a back and forth. So my preference, I suppose, would be, give me 10 minutes to use some respectful questions to challenge your view. And then when we're done, you can ask me any question that you'd like in return. But it can absolutely be a back and forth. I've just found that when it is a back and forth, like, I ask a question, you ask a question, and that goes on, that can still be productive, but it's not, it takes a little bit longer to get to their methodology. And when we're doing street epistemology, that's a big part of what we're interested in, is the method that a person is using to verify the reasons that they are basing their confidence in a particular claim. But if there's this back and forth interruption, it kind of gets in the way of it, but you can absolutely do that. There are a lot of people today who sometimes just say, and I've even done this too. Actually, I do this a lot lately. I said, would you like to know where I stand on your claim before we proceed? Or at any point, if you'd like to know where I stand, I'd be more than happy to reveal it to you. So you can absolutely do that. But I think there's just a few minor risks if you do.
It seems like what you're doing, maybe indirectly, is building like a level of rapport with the person, or you're displaying a genuine curiosity to them about what they think that maybe makes them feel safer or more comfortable in hearing the opposing viewpoint. Is that accurate?
I think that's a big part of it. Establishing trust is a huge part of this approach. And I would say try to be as honest and sincere as possible. Like, yes, you recognize that, hey, if I'm polite and honest and respectful, they're going to probably open up and it's going to be a more productive conversation. But those are all good things to do in a conversation anyways, in my view. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a nice byproduct of just being a good interlocutor with the conversation partner that you happen to be challenging the questions.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just be a nice person, right?
Just be honest and say, I really don't think that that's true. However, I'd really like to explore with you to figure out how you concluded that it is. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about that? And so you're getting some consent, you're laying everything out. You can offer to reveal your position. They may already know it in some cases, especially if it's family or friends and you've battled before on some of these topics, like immigration or police brutality or whatever. Sometimes you have to do a little damage control before you can gain that trust again.
Yeah. Is this something that you think people can, like, if you've already had a bad experience with someone and maybe someone has labeled you as the enemy because of a previous interaction you had, do you think that this tool can be used to rebuild that relationship and to find common ground? Or is a bridge burned once it's burned, or can it be rebuilt with something like SE?
I've burned bridges and I've attempted to rebuild some, and some I've been able to do and some I haven't. So am I saying that like this is the solution to fix all the problems? I don't think so. But most people, I think, feel bad about those burnt bridges. If you're feeling bad about them, more than likely your conversation partner is also feeling bad about them. And I've recommended in the past just saying something like being honest with them, acknowledging and say, listen, I know the last few times that we've talked about this subject, it got really ugly. And I ended up walking away feeling terrible about it. And it made me really mad at myself and at you. And I really don't want that to be the outcome. I want to understand your perspective and help you understand mine. And in the process, challenge you a little bit in a respectful way, how you're so sure that this is true. Would you mind if I tried a different approach? You can completely reset it. Now, sticking to it is a little challenging. Like the learning the technique is really not that difficult, but learning to control your ego and your desire to pounce on somebody when they say something that you're sure is factually untrue, you got to learn how to control that. If you can control for that, and you can learn this approach, and you have an honest conversation partner, you're going to have amazing conversations. You're going to have productive conversations. You're going to have effective conversations.
Yeah, that's the hard part right there, is managing that rise that you get. Does that ever happen to you whenever you, like in your talks with people who believe in God, for example? Do you
Are you kidding me? Yeah, I mean, look at some of the older stuff that I've uploaded. In fact, the last video that I uploaded, the most recent one, includes a few snippets of me engaging with street preacher. I'll call him a street preacher. He was like a street evangelizer. And I just couldn't control my own desire to argue with him. Now that is a technique, a skill that I think I've learned over the years. When you have enough conversations with people where you use both approaches and you're like, I controlled myself really well in that talk. What was different? Well, I wasn't so invested in the topic. I didn't really, like, it wasn't God, it was about something else. So once you start learning, oh wow, when I use this approach, everything seems to go really well. When I use this other approach and I argue with them, it doesn't seem to go very well. You start training yourself in a way to be disciplined, and maybe even recognizing, okay, I'm starting to get upset here. I'm going to end it. I'm deciding to end the conversation now, and I'm going to try to pick it up later. So you start becoming more in tune with how you're emotionally reacting to what your conversation partner is saying. And in the process, I think you can learn to control it. There are some people, though, I think they will always struggle with that. My advice to them is ask yourself what topics you find yourself struggling to control your emotions with the most, and talk with people about other subjects until you can learn to recognize those little trigger points that happen.
Yeah, that's useful advice. And, like anything, this is probably, I'm sure since you started in 2013, you've improved enormously. So, this is
I like to think so.
Yeah. This is like anything. You'd get better by doing it more, right? This is just another tool in your tool belt that you can sharpen and have ready for any situation.
Well, what happened is not only was I personally engaging in the dialogues and then reflecting on them afterwards, and then I was recording them and putting them on my YouTube channel and maybe adding captions. So when you're slowing down conversations and you're typing what each person is saying, that was an amazing educational experience for me, on top of getting feedback from other people who are watching the videos, sometimes even experts in philosophy or psychology, psychotherapy, linguistics. I was getting tips from people to say, try this instead next time you go out. So it was a developmental process, kind of played out in public for my own benefit, but I think other people have been able to benefit from watching it as well.
What are some of the tips that resonated with you most that you received from other people?
That's a damn good question. Let me think about that for a second. One of the biggest tips that took me a while to grasp is that you really need to work out your terms very early on, definitions of words. Because I can talk with somebody for 30 minutes about a subject that I think we're talking about, and they have a completely different meaning of a specific word. So making sure that you're clearing up the definitions of words at the start and even throughout, because sometimes midway through the conversation, a new word will pop up, and you'll want to recognize that that's a word that we may be completely talking past each other on. Mm-hmm. Another thing would be pausing. So when you ask a question and the person steps back and does like a thinker's pose, don't ask them another question. Don't ask them to clarify. Give them time to think about what you just asked. And then if they're confused or they look like they're being confused, you can offer a clarification. And then maybe don't overwhelm people also. It could be really tempting when you learn this approach, because you can see, it seems apparent that they're really processing your questions. They're thinking about it. They're expressing doubt, which could be the precursor to belief revision. When you see that can be really exciting as a practitioner. So sometimes the act of watching somebody think and process your questions can really get you amped up. So learning to just, okay, this is a wonderful moment. Don't ruin it. Chill out, take a breath, and then get back to it. Okay, so learning how to control your emotions, I guess, again, is one of those things that keeps coming up. But listen, that's one of the things it's within your control. And if you can learn to control for that, like I said, you're going to have really good talks.
Yeah. I want to go back to the setting terms things because I was watching some of your videos and there was one with, I think her name was Vanessa, about epistemic justice was the
Love
talk.
that talk.
Yeah, it was awesome. Awesome talk. But one of the things that I was kind of, I don't know, taken by was the amount of time that was spent just talking about what truth is, and on one hand, it was really useful, I think, to both get on the same page about what that actually means so that you could have a fruitful conversation. But then on the other hand, is it kind of a bummer that we need to find a place to agree on about about something like the word truth? Like, how do you view that?
I mean, I wouldn't call it a bummer. It's just it's the nature of the reality that we're in, that people are running around with wild definitions of what the word truth is. It's conceivable that every SE conversation could benefit from having just a quick back and forth of, what do you mean by the word true, before we get to your claim? And I remember Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson kind of got into this. Do you remember that episode? It was a while ago.
Was it their talk that they did with, I think, Eric Weinstein moderating or something?
I don't think it was a video. I thought it was audio only, but it's been brought to my attention that they actually sat down and they may have talked about this too. But it was a 2-part podcast. And I remember a lot of people were upset that Sam spent so much time with Jordan about the word truth. But that was time well spent. And just like the conversation with Vanessa, who is under the impression that something is factually true if the statement is coming from a culture that has an aggrieved past. They've struggled in the past. They're ancient. They're this old culture. Mm-hmm. Therefore, what they say is more true than what another more recent culture might say. That is very important to work out before you get to any claim whatsoever. But a lot of people just assume that we're all talking about the same thing when we bring up the word true or truth. So that is, you probably can't spend too much time on that word. You need to understand where the person is coming from. Again, you need to meet them where they're at. Mm-hmm. It made no sense to really talk about how she determined that something is true when we differ on the nature of truth altogether. You almost have to. This is going to be kind of, this may or may not be controversial. If somebody thinks truth is subjective and not objective, then it's difficult to explore a person's certainty and the quality of their reasons and the reliability of their methods that something really is indeed, in fact, something that's true. You really need to help them recognize that truth is objective. And they probably recognize that it is objective in some instances, but they might be making an exception for other claims. But even that's worth exploring by using questions when you can SE that. So am I understanding correctly, there's 2 different types of truth? Can you tell me what you mean by that? Can you give me an example of this kind of truth compared to this kind of truth? How do you, when you go to a class and you prepare for an exam, you can use real world examples to explore how they're using that word, but it's it's an important word that has to be cleared out.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to stick with truth for a second. So in a conversation where you're trying to parse out what truth is, and maybe you don't come to an agreement with the interlocutor, is that something that stops the conversation, or do you update your understanding of truth just for the sake of continuing the conversation? Like, how does that unfold if you can't find an agreement?
Awesome question. So when most people use street epistemology, we of course have our own views, positions, biases. We have our own definitions of words even. But what we try to do, or at least what I try to advocate for, is to go with the meaning of words that your conversation partner is using. Because you're exploring their views. You're exploring their confidence that something is true. So you would be basically, if I said, listen, I'm going to apply all my meanings of words to your view and challenge your position, that's not going to help them. That's going to confuse them. Mm-hmm. You need to speak in their language, essentially. So I adopt their definition of the word true. I adopt their definition of words and and all this other stuff for the purpose of the conversation. I don't adopt it permanently, right? But I'll say, okay, that's really interesting that you're viewing things in that way. How do you deal with this particular situation? Can you explain this? If we had two people with competing views, how would you determine who actually has the truth of the matter as you're defining that word? So the way that I suppose, look at this is that people will probably be more willing to reflect on their own views and maybe even change their minds if you're talking in the language that they're developing for the mind map that they built, right? It's their map that you're navigating with them. It would just confuse them if you started using different language. But in the process of you asking your questions, you're going to probably help them discover on their own, in their own language, in their own map, that there's something wrong. Something's not jiving here. There's a conflict of some sort. But you're giving them the space to develop that and figure it out and view it on their own, and then decide if it's important enough for them to correct their map. Right? This isn't me pointing and saying you're wrong. It's them discovering that I can't explain how this works exactly. And that's the process that gets people thinking. That's what we're going for. We're trying to help people think about the beliefs that they formed in their own language so that they can determine if the time is right for them, if they need to make a correction.
Would you view it as a win then? Say this was a common practice and everyone was doing SE and we had all had conversations about the meaning of the word true. Would it be a win then for everyone to have the same definition of what truth is, or is there room for people's subjective interpretations of these words and still have room for us to have fruitful, meaningful conversations?
Another good question. My sense is that humanity would probably be a better place if we were all on the same page with regards to what the word true meant. However, we could probably carve out some exceptions for particular areas of our culture. So maybe people who are creative, artists, authors, people who use their imaginations might be constrained in some way. Maybe if we held everyone to a high standard that you can't really engage with anyone in society unless you think truth is objective. But listen, if you're going to be in law enforcement or a politician or a scientist, a teacher, I would say a parent, I think it would be advisable to put a high valuation on objective truth. You can recognize that there are other interpretations of what that word means, but as far as navigating reality, it seems like that's most optimal for human beings.
Yeah, to all have the same starting point.
Ideally, yeah, I think so. I don't know what a world would look like. Maybe there are cultures today where the majority of the population does view truth in objective terms. That would actually be kind of an interesting study to look at. I wonder if there'd be some correlations between the standard of quality of life and the standard of education, that type of thing.
Where you're saying where truth is understood to be the same thing across the whole population.
No, well, I was thinking the opposite. Well, yeah, we could probably look at it in both ways. I was thinking, let's find a culture that largely thinks truth is objective. Would there be less artists in that culture? I'm not sure. Would there be more scientists? I would think it would probably break that way, but we'd have to look at that.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Interesting because, yeah, you're right. There may be some cases where it's desirable to have people thinking of things like truth in a different way because, artists push forward how we view the world. They change our perspective on things. But at the same time, I don't know. I just can't get over this sense that it is a somewhat of a bummer. And I'm sorry to use that word again. I know you didn't like it before, but somewhat of a bummer that
I'll go with your words
that we have to spend time parsing out these things whenever there's other conversations that need to be had. Is it possible to solve the problems of today without having to spend time talking about what's true, what is racism, what are all these things? Can we solve these problems without that discussion?
There might be a handful of questions that might be like something that you ever see like these you go to a party, like a cocktail party, and there might be, I've never seen them in real life, but I've seen them like in magazines and stuff, where you walk up to somebody and they can immediately glance and see like how many years you've been in real estate and what city you're from, certain attributes about yourself. Now, it might be kind of cool to record those attributes of, I don't know, I'm kind of going off on this weird hypothetical, but yeah, I'm like, do you think truth is objective? Yes. Do you think that humans give meaning to words? Yes. Do you think that hypotheticals can be useful? Yes. Like, these might be really good questions to ask to associate with your identity. And then if you run into somebody, you can say, oh, wow, we match on these 5. Okay, now let's talk about racism. Yeah. Like some sort of like a preliminary hurdles to sort of overcome. But that's not how it works. Mm-hmm. We walk up to people, even people we know for years, and we think we're on the same page with regards to the meanings of these words, and we just don't. We're talking past each other. Mm-hmm. So some things that you can listen very closely to what people say. If somebody says, well, this is my truth, that's usually an indication that they're viewing truth in subjective terms. It's true for me. Do you ever get that?
Yeah.
How does that work exactly? How could something be true for you? Well, if they're using true to mean my preference, then that would make sense. So you really do have to clear up these differences.
Yeah. I think that it's true for me thing happens a lot in terms of lived experience, that I was treated badly by such and such type of person. So therefore these types of people are generally bad, right?
So it's true that they had the experience, but does that correlate to the actual fact of the matter that the entire race is in the same boat as the interaction that you happen to have? Mm-hmm. Yes, I reckon we have to be careful. You have to recognize that people have had experiences. It's true that they had the experience, but what's not necessarily true is the conclusion that they're arriving at. Mm-hmm. And that's the distinction that you need to get into by asking these questions. We have a president that says, well, that's fake news. What is he exactly saying there? I would love to interview him, actually, by the way. But
that'd be great.
My impression is that he's saying, I don't like what is being said here, and therefore I'm dismissing it, and I'm calling it fake or untrue. I would love to get the president's definition of the word truth or true. I think that would be a fascinating conversation. Yeah. I think he views truth I think he thinks he's making his own reality and he can make things true. And I think a lot of people think that way.
I guess that presents a massive hurdle. And I mean,
right. How do you have a conversation with somebody who refuses to accept the outcome of the election because he doesn't think that it's accurate? Because it's not true to him, therefore it's not true. Mm-hmm. That is a big ass problem. And we're seeing it being played out on the highest levels, which is shocking to see, because I've been seeing it on a day-to-day basis just with the everyday person on the street. Not all the time, but I'd say maybe 30 to 40% of the people that I talk to, especially when the rubber hits the road and they start realizing, well, I really can't differentiate the way that I'm coming to conclude that my God is real or that this particular truth claim is factually true. But you know what? I don't want to ruffle any feathers, and it's true to me, and that's good enough for me. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people running around with that sort of software in their brains.
Yeah. How do you get them to reboot that software? Is it just
engagement?
Just engagement.
Engagement. You have to engage with them. You can't blow them off and say they're nuts, because your kid may actually be having the same view. Would you blow them off? Of course you wouldn't. So this isn't a quick fix, but if you take the time to engage with the person in their own language, and you're giving them plenty of time to think about the questions that you're asking, that is what leads to belief consideration and belief revision.
Have you ever done SE with someone who believes in QAnon?
People have asked me this a lot, but I really haven't, only because I've been actually curtailing my going out in public and recording stuff anyways. Mm. And then with COVID, that's kind of put on the back burner. And lately, I don't know if I really want to keep going out and doing more videos. Like, I have hundreds of videos on my YouTube channel. I've got a few more in the queue that will be on my channel. But I've moved on to more strategic stuff, talking with folks like you, so that we can get the word out about this approach. We like you mentioned, we formed a nonprofit called Street Epistemology International because we want to get this tool set into the hands of as many people as possible, regardless of the tribe that you're in. We want everyone to learn this tool so that they can be using it with their own tribe mates. Mm-hmm. Is that a word? Tribe mates?
It is now.
It is now. Thank you.
It's true to us.
and people outside of your tribe. So I'm optimistic. We're even developing a course so that if you're not into watching videos, which in my view is the best way to learn it and observe it and see the potential that this approach has, but you can read books like Boghossian's books that started all this. He has a more recent one called How to Have Impossible Conversations, which is really great. It takes a look at everything that has happened since he wrote his first book, and it's a great update. So I'd highly recommend that. We've started a course. There's people on Reddit, Discord, Twitter. People from around the world are recognizing the value of this approach, and they're incorporating into their conversations.
Yeah, that's extremely valuable. And I haven't gone back to read Dr. Boghossian's books yet, but it's on my Amazon wish list this Christmas. So I'll let you know. But
fair enough.
Yeah, the reason I brought up QAnon was because I have a couple friends who are pretty deep down this rabbit hole, and they believe that they are on like this this light side. They're supporting something that's very good. You know, they believe that they are noble, that they are highly moral characters who have seen the truth and who are like making posts and supporting the I don't know, the destruction of this evil force. You know, it's very much a battle of good versus evil to people who believe in that sort of conspiracy. So I wonder how effective can just asking questions be with someone who believes that they believe this thing because they are good. You know, am I making sense with this question?
Totally. No, you totally are. So I think underneath the street epistemology is something called, we're sort of dubbing the moral epistemology. It's a way of knowing that is sort of tied in very closely with your understanding that you are a good person yourself. So if I'm holding a view and I think that I'm a good person because I'm holding the view, that's a pretty resistant belief. That's going to fight off any evidence that you can throw at it. Mm-hmm. But the solution to it is to engage in conversation where you're asking questions to see how they would be any different if they one day realized that they could no longer justify the view. Do you really think that you would be less of a good person? And how would that manifest? Mm-hmm. There's a video on my channel with a guy named Justin. Now, it was about God, not QAnon, but the thinking is the same. He was of the position that he might actually go out and start lying more to other people if he actually had a funny definition of the word truth too. I think he called it dramatic truth. So it kind of ties in nicely with this whole conversation. But yeah, helping a person realize on their own that they probably wouldn't be any different morally if they discarded this view because they learned that they couldn't justify it. That really helps open the door to belief revision. People have to understand on their own. They have to come around on their own that they could still be good without holding this view. But you can't tell them that. You really need to ask them questions in their own language and help them discover it on their own. Now, there are this one guy that I was talking to, Justin, he seemed to suggest that maybe he would actually harm people if he didn't think that his belief was true, that he really would be less of a good person. And then we talked about it. We said something like, I think I asked him, are you one of those people that we should just stay away from and just let you continue believing this because you might actually go out and harm somebody? I can't remember his answer, but the idea here is to place a pebble in a person's shoes so that they can start thinking about these things. We don't usually think about the thoughts that we formed and that we're forming. And that's all tied into this whole thing.
Yeah, that's why I am so grateful to have discovered this year, is because once I kind of absorbed more of your work and listened to the interview with Zach Rhodes and checked out some other appearances you've had, I started to look at my own beliefs, and I was like, holy crap, I have this bookshelf full of beliefs that I don't know how I arrived at, you know? And so it was like this almost intimidating work of like, all right, now, you know, every time I feel compelled to say something in conversation that I believe strongly, I need to take a second and really think about, why do I believe that? Is that a justified belief? Is that, you know?
That's beautiful, because so that is a wonderful outcome of SE that I didn't even think of when I started going out and having talks. Like, these interactions start affecting you as the practitioner, because you tend to be a little bit more humble about what you can claim to be the case, especially when you're on Facebook or you're in groups. Like, we have this wonderful Discord server for Street Epistemology. Maybe we can put the link in the at some point, put it out there. But you tend to become a little bit more cautious with how far you're willing to walk out on that branch. But that's useful. That's beneficial, because you're only revealing positions that you think that you can actually justify to yourself and to other people, which is completely different than how we usually go about doing it. We sort of just spew things out because we heard about them. When you start hanging around people that know this technique and you start using it on your own, you start doing some pre-SE before you start making that post on Facebook, that is useful. That is the solution to stemming the flow of false information. And being nice about it too. Like, if I see a friend of mine post something that really seems to be false, I can they sort of know me now, like, oh, this is Anthony asking these questions. If you don't mind, how did you determine that was actually true? Was that the actual tweet, or did you see the actual tweet the president made on that? Or is that a screenshot that you happen to find somewhere? Then usually an hour later, they write back and say, well, that was really a tweet by the president. Okay, cool. Thank you. Or, I looked into it, and as it turns out, I couldn't find it in his timeline, and there's some controversy over it, and he may have actually deleted it, or I don't even know. So I'm deleting the post. So, but obviously catching those, what's the word I'm looking for? Catching those meme errors before they get propagated is great in and of itself. But once they're out there, you can still help people take another look at their views too.
Yeah. Social media is an interesting place that I'm sure makes this task of spreading SE both more difficult and easier. Difficult because, like you said before, I don't know if you've seen The Social Dilemma, the documentary.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah. And so, we're living in a society where two people who are close friends but have slightly different viewpoints might be getting feeds that are completely different and even opposing, that are just tailored to them. So they're walking around with two versions of what reality is in their heads, even though they're close friends. And, how do you view the role of social media in making, can social media be around and us improve our conversations, or is this just bad? Like, what are your thoughts on social?
The genie might be out of the, is genie out? Do you let the genie out of the bag? Is that a phrase?
I thought it was out of the bottle, out of the lamp.
Out of the bottle. Yes. What gets let out of the bag? I don't know.
Cat's out of the bag.
Cat's out of the bag. Yeah. I think that's already, social media will probably always be around in one form or the other. There are probably things that these companies can do, but then again, like what we see, Twitter's kind of getting involved in making actual like warnings on the tweets that the president is making. This is unprecedented, but it seems like it's necessary. It seems like it's a ham-fisted attempt to try to do something. Is it the best thing? I don't know. Honestly, the best solution is not social media at all in my mind. Like, that's just kind of where all these problems manifest and play out. It starts with kids. We have to teach kids how to be more skeptical and how to push back on authority in a respectful way when they're told something. So when your parents, your teachers, or whoever says something, you hear something on TV, your first reaction isn't to just accept it, it's to question it and say, I really wonder if that's true. That's where we need to get to. We're not there yet. I think there are lots of different people trying to make that happen. Nothing seems to be catching on. It's almost like yelling into the wind or into the hurricane. It's really kind of demoralizing.
Have you seen, I'm sure, I'm speaking anecdotally and, letting you know how meaningful SE was to me, but is there a general growth in the amount of people and the participants, say in like the Discord, or people who are reaching out to you saying that they've found your method interesting? Are you seeing kind of a groundswell of support for this?
Yeah, groundswell is a really good way of putting it. there's sort of this natural momentum that's been churning for the last 7 or 8 years. And it's getting momentum. People are noticing it. It started in the atheist community. That may have actually set us back a little bit, because who wants to do something that these nasty heathens are doing? So that may have actually set us back. But I think I think there are enough examples online now where we're exploring all different types of claims, not just God claims. And I've used this approach with atheists, by the way, too. But
the approach of asking them questions of how they arrived at their belief, is that what you mean?
Yeah. How could you be so sure that there's no higher power? Mm-hmm. And I've seen people back off of their certainty on that claim. Mm-hmm. But no, I mean, it's picking up. It's an international thing. This isn't just a hobby or a flash in the pan thing. I think, I'm fairly confident that this will eventually reach the point where it will start infiltrating our culture, and we'll start noticing it. We'll start noticing. In fact, I think I've even seen it with Joe Rogan, to be honest. But I've noticed him asking more questions. How do you know that? Well, let's look that up. Whereas maybe in the past he wasn't doing that so much. Yeah. So I'd love to see reporters starting to do this. Politicians. I would love to see this is what I would like to do. I'd like to get to the point where we might be able to, meaning Street Epistemology, the community or the nonprofit that we have, where we might actually be able to get 2 influential people who disagree, teach them, if they're open to it, this method, or at least bring them in with the understanding that they'll be attempting to have a civil conversation. Maybe we can start there.
Yeah.
And model this type of exchange so that we're not just posturing for our tribes, but we're really trying to figure out what's really true. Because I think all of us really want to have the truth of the matter. Mm-hmm. Even though there are many people who say, well, I'm content, it makes me feel good and that's good enough for me and I don't even care if it's true. A lot of people do say that. But honest, here's the spoiler. Most people really do value truth when you talk to them about that stuff. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we need to get, where we're making it normal to push back with respectful questions and not just nodding our head and going along with it, or saying, this is too contentious of a topic and I don't want to have a battle, because that's often where people go. They start arguing and giving facts. You don't need to do that. Mm-hmm. We have a better way. We just need to get the momentum and get this noticed by the mainstream culture.
Yeah. And I think in the, you mentioned people gearing up for battle whenever they get into these contentious topics. I didn't use SE while I was back home for Thanksgiving with my parents. We didn't actually get into any contentious topics, thankfully. But the political landscape seems so ripe for something like this, where, the average citizen might have a very strong opinion about something like abortion or something like gun rights. But what are the odds that they know everything about it? Many people who have this strong opinion might not even be familiar with the opposing viewpoint at all, or they might have a surface level understanding, right? So it seems like the political landscape in particular could really benefit from SE.
And imagine the frustration if you hold the opposite position of the person that you're speaking with, and they think they understand your view. That's very frustrating. So we have to stop talking past each other. We really need to start listening and revealing each other's level of expertise and be open to hearing them out, but push back with questions. Because there's this idea of it's called the illusion of explanatory depth. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Oh, it's this concept where people tend to think that they understand how things really work, but when you start asking them to explain it, it breaks down rather quickly. So if I asked you, can you explain how a toilet works, or do you know how a toilet works? Our knee-jerk reaction would be like, well, yeah, I use the bathroom, I flush the thing, the water, there's enough force for the water to go out, and it goes down to the street and into the whatever, right? But if I were to ask you a couple more questions about that, it might become evident, unless you were an expert in that field, that you really don't know as much about that as you think that you do.
Yeah, right when you asked me that, I had a holy shit moment. I was like, oh, I can picture the water going down, but I actually don't have any idea how that happens.
But we tend to overestimate our understanding of things, and then we incorporate that. It's not, what's the opposite of ignorance? Like overconfidence, I guess, maybe? Mm-hmm. We tend to bring that overconfidence to our conversations, and we walk very far out on that branch. And we think that branch is going to hold us But sometimes you don't realize how far out you are on that branch until you encounter somebody that says, "Why are you standing way out there?"
How familiar are you with the Unity movement?
A little bit. A little bit. I think I might even still be a Patreon for Eric Weinstein, but a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to give you just a quick overview and maybe illuminate why this conversation is so important to us that we're having. We were started by Brett Weinstein. It was a movement to get a center-left and a center-right person on the presidential ticket for 2020. Obviously, it didn't work out. But one of the major things about the whole movement is facilitating conversation between the two sides. And the idea of having a center-left person and a center-right person on the presidential ticket was to have both viewpoints represented in the decision room when things are happening, to not have just a singular voice, not one person speaking for the whole country when really they just represent one party or one line of thought, if that makes sense. So the reason this conversation was interesting to us to have was because, one, we are believers in the need for conversation across the aisles and between parties and between opposing viewpoints to get to the truth. But also, I think that there is a challenge that we have as an organization of reaching people who are tied to the two-party system or who do believe that their party is the right one and might have resistance to having a two-party ticket. So with that in mind, I wonder what kind of advice you might have for us in reaching people and kind of breaking down this tribalism that seems to exist with some people on either side of the political aisle.
Well, that's good. That's a hard question. I mean, I think what you're doing is probably a good first step. You're actually showing two people who disagree working together towards a common goal. So you're modeling what you'd like other people to start doing. Maybe shedding some light on the views that other people hold that are on these polar opposites, bringing them in, talking to them might be probably the best thing that you can do. Like, if there was a way to bring in AOC, from the far left, or bring in somebody from the far right, like I was going to say Rand Paul, but there's probably somebody further right to him, Lindsey Graham. Okay, like let's bring Ted Cruz maybe. Mike, I think didn't they tweet at each other? Like that might be a really good first step. Bring in some of these somebody further extreme than where you folks are on the for the Unity project. That might be something that you could do, where you're giving them a place to express their views, but you're still pushing back with questions. You're not, again, this isn't agreeing to disagree. It's having long form conversations with plenty of time to think about it. And you're not asking gotcha questions. You're really sincerely trying to figure out if they're correct or not. Mm-hmm. If you can create an environment where you're regularly, like if there was a variation of, I don't even like saying the guy's name, but if there was a variation of these gatherings where you get a couple of contemporary experts, I don't know what I'm looking, people on stage who hold different views talking about these things in long form conversation, I think that would be great. Mm-hmm. I don't even think it necessarily has to be on stage. I mean, if we can get an AOC and a Lindsey Graham on a Zoom call with a facilitator, having a really good conversation where they're not arguing. But see, I don't know if they would be willing to do that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either.
There might be too much at stake within their own tribes. We need people who are brave enough to stand up to their own tribes for the benefit of discourse and figuring out the truth of the matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that does seem to be a major hurdle in what we're trying to do, is just that, there is such tribalism that there is, kind of going to what we were saying earlier, to go the other direction gets you labeled as the other. You get kicked out of your group for questioning the group or for raising any.
Look what's happened to Trump, with Fox News. Mm-hmm. There are people who are, at least as far as I can tell, that's kind of the sense I'm getting. A lot of people aren't happy with Fox News not towing the line with regards to the outcome of the election. Mm-hmm. And what are they doing? They're not necessarily petitioning to Fox News and saying, why aren't you covering the truth of the matter or whatever? They're leaving for more dogmatic positions. they're becoming more extreme. They're becoming more dogmatic. And that's the opposite of that's the opposite of the direction that I think you're trying to accomplish with your group, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, getting to the top level is nice, but I think one of the ways that we've identified moving forward is, like I said earlier, growing the groundswell of the movement, getting people at the lower levels, citizens, average citizens, to realize what is going on, how the two parties are kind of playing this game with each other at the risk of everybody. How do we reach the average citizen? A lot of the messaging that I've seen us put out is very much like trying to show that the emperor has no clothes. It's almost like trying to dissolve people's beliefs in what the system is, if that makes sense. So we're trying to show them that what they believe in, i.e. the Republicans and Democrats, are not actually worth supporting, if that makes sense. So it's almost as if
the parties are not really representing their views.
Right. And it's difficult, I think, because you're getting into this place of preaching to people, maybe, of like not meeting them where they're at and trying to force a message onto them and trying to get your perspective across to them instead of understanding why they are still, an avid Trump supporter or avid Democrat. How can we reach people who are in these camps without talking down to them, without, is it just going back to having these one-on-one conversations? Because that seems like a hard place to grow groundswell for a political movement, right? And I'm sorry if that was a horrible question. I was thinking as I was talking.
I think I followed most of it. So I'll give an answer, and if it's not what you were looking for, then let me know. But I don't really, my suspicion is that there is a solution, and it's engagement where you're listening and asking questions and pushing back and make, in a respectful way, because that's what seems to help people reflect on their views the most. But I think it's something that has to be done on the individual level. So, like, for example, one of my siblings came over the other day, and he somehow mentioned that there's this list. There's the Democrats are making a list of people. I think, did AOC mention something about a list? Yeah. I don't even remember, because it's like, it's, so anyways, I basically just said, listen, I find it really frustrating when I hear somebody make an argument for my position that I don't have. And most of the people in my circle don't even know what the freaking list is that you're talking about. And so I was basically just being honest with them. And I said, it's frustrating to me that there are people who are in a different camp that are being told something as if it's something that's really first and foremost on our mind, when in reality, it's one or two people who said something, and then it's being blanketed, applied to my tribe. And it really frustrates me when I hear that, because you're not on any list. Mm-hmm. So I think just maybe expressing your own frustration with what you're seeing on the other side, and maybe within your own tribe, can probably help distance yourself. Like, oh, wow. So my hope was that he walked away thinking, wow, Anthony, even though he might align in a particular party, doesn't necessarily agree with everything that they say. That could have been a huge learning experience for him, just to plant that pebble that, wow, the next time I hear something on Fox isn't necessarily my brother's position. Mm-hmm. That might be kind of helping to open the door. And then maybe also me recognizing that the next time I hear something from his tribe, it's not necessarily his own perspective. Mm-hmm. So we don't always align with our tribes, but we're not really quick to admit that because of the implications. You can be booted from your tribe. We talked about that a little bit at the start. Mm-hmm. So that might be the first step of it. But, I'll be damned. I had to stop by the house the other day, and sure enough, there was a news program on that is just consistently, putting forward these wild ideas that aren't consistent with how I'm seeing reality. So it's very frustrating. Perhaps just the recognition that you're being fed a narrative that people are expecting you to believe just because it happens to be coming from your favorite news channel. Mm-hmm. just the realization, like that movie that you mentioned before, like I think that was really valuable. That opens up some people's eyes. But once that movie's off, the same old news program comes back on. So we have to keep at this persistently and consistently. So like that one little exchange with my family member maybe left a little bit of an impact, but if he encounters somebody else that pushes back, maybe can get him to the next step, and so on.
Yeah, it's a gradual process. I mean, that's just like your SE videos.
It takes dedication. It takes a commitment to not just say, you know what, I just don't have time to deal with this right now. I'd rather just turn on TikTok or something.
Yeah.
We have to make it a priority.
Yeah, and using those platforms where people are to spread the ideas, right? It's if it weren't for Twitter and YouTube, I would not know as much about what you're doing as I currently do. So it's, I think there's a certain utility that tools like social media have for spreading this information and for converting people, for lack of a better word, to this form of dialogue, right?
Yeah, social media has been really useful. I probably wouldn't have stumbled across Boghossian's books, or you for that matter, or me, if it wasn't for social media. So there's value in it, but it could very easily be perverted. And I think there's also a human tendency to want to think that you are the good person and they're the bad person. So, and then we have all these cognitive biases at play as well that make it really hard to break out of it. I don't know if we're going to survive this. I don't, unless we do something concerted, and consistent.
When you say survive in this, can you define those two? Do you mean literally survive the moment? And by this, do you mean this?
Sometimes I wonder.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder if this is like, maybe there's a reason we don't see a lot of other civilizations out there.
Yeah, the bottleneck.
This could be one of the big filters.
Yeah, the filter. Yeah, I must admit, I do wonder that too. If this is, I on my personal podcast, I had a conversation with a gentleman who was, who's a Rome scholar, and he wrote a book about the fall of Rome, the Roman Republic, and one of the things that he talked about that went wrong with Rome was, violence entering politics, was this sort of, ugly, not for the people form of discussion where people weren't really concerned with the other side. They were, it was just a very contentious period that they went through that led them to seek the rule of authoritarians, if that makes sense. There was a threat of violence in society that people were willing to trade freedom in return for safety. And sometimes I wonder if we are closing in on that point ourselves. And I don't know if that's what you mean by survive or if you mean something more brutal. But I think either scenario is not wanted.
Yeah. I don't know if I could expand on it much more than what I have, other than to say that I'm more pessimistic than optimistic, only because, it's really frustrating because I think we really do have a solution here, but we don't have any of the financial backing or gravitas to really get it implemented into the culture. And I'm not exactly sure how we would bake it into the culture where it became commonplace. But I do think that if we made asking questions about the claims people make, and then also teaching critical thinking at a young age, I think that's the solution. But it seems like there's so much against us to make that happen. And I don't know if that's by design or there's just too much entertainment, distraction that gets in the way. Like I said, it's just more fun to boot up TikTok and watch that as opposed to having a 30-minute talk with your sibling about the state of the election and whether it was really rigged or not.
Well, I mean, on the brighter side of that, some of your videos are, only 4 to 7 minutes long, and you can easily,
There's some short ones.
Yeah, you can digest those quickly. And maybe it's just a matter of getting people in these positions of power, like you mentioned, entertainment, to be curious about these methods and to want to use them in, say, a movie, where you have a hit movie where the character is really good at asking questions or something, or maybe, because this is something I've heard some people say before, I'm not sure where right now, but I tend to agree with it, that to change what's going on is going to take at least a generation, right? It's probably going to take a long time to change, but as long as people who are in positions of power are willing to kind of divert course, then I think the hope is a little more warranted.
Would it be ironic if we had to rely on the subjective people, those artists, those creative folks in our society to help propagate this method? That might be what it takes. I think we need some more creative ways of doing it. The reason why you mentioned that there are a couple shorter videos on my channel, they were probably longer talks, but I think I just chunked them down to 4 or 5 minutes just because I recognized that this is a battle of attention. So I thought, well, if I can put a couple of short videos out there, it might intrigue people to look into the longer ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't want to end this on a pessimistic note. What kind of things give you hope for the future? What kind of things are you excited about? I know, you're doing what you can to grow the movement, and I'm certainly, going to keep my eye on it. What's giving you hope?
Well, what gives me hope is that there are people from around the world who are discovering this approach. They're using it. Of course, there are cultural differences. There's different meanings of words, like faith has these different connotations in Germany, for example. But so that gives me hope. I've also noticed that there have been people who have been on the receiving end of a SE conversation. So I have a friend who is an atheist, and he engaged with a theist about his God claim. And I don't really know the outcome of where he stands on his view, whether he shifted or not. But that theist messaged the atheist to say, thank you for the conversation. I'm now looking into street epistemology, and I'm using it with people that I disagree with on politics. And I'm finding it to be a very useful tool. So that is very encouraging to me, that people that I might completely disagree with fundamentally still see the value in the approach and they're using it. And I think that is the solution. Once people, regardless, independent of whatever tribe you happen to be in, start using it, that's when I think we're going to start nudging closer and closer to the actual truth of the matter.
Mm-hmm. And I think generally there is a hunger among people to have an end to this crazy moment that we're in, to end the divisiveness and the partisanship. I genuinely believe that people want to live in a world that is less loud, that is less, tribal. So hopefully something like this can catch fire.
I really hope so.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you have anything we missed that you want to make sure we add on here, or any final thoughts?
I guess the only thing I probably want to add is that there's a multinational effort to develop a training course, a self-directed training course for people. So we want to make that a community-driven thing. So if there's a specific topic that you'd like to see in a course on having more effective dialogue, there will be a way to actually submit your ideas for course material. There will be a link on the Street Epistemology website, and that's probably the best place to go to find links to communities and resources so that you can learn more about this approach.
Yeah, that's been super helpful for me. That Street Epistemology handbook was great. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a little dated. We need to update that, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, it was great. It gave me a nice little intro into everything. Cool. Well, thanks very much, Anthony. I really appreciate your time, and it's been a pleasure getting to chat with you.
It's been my pleasure, Eric. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. For more conversations and content like this, be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you prefer: Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. If you prefer to consume your podcasts in video format, you'll find full episodes and clips on YouTube. Follow the UnityNow podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram by clicking the links in the description below, and be sure to sign up and get involved at articlesofunity.org.
Bye.